Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And my name's Joanna, and I'd like to welcome you along to Simple Flying's first ever webinar. I will be handing you over to John Grant in a moment to begin what should be a really interesting discussion with Sir Tim Clark, President of Emirates. But before I do, just a little bit of housekeeping. If by any stretch of the imagination you managed to get through 2020 without attending at least 10 of these. So you are all in listen only mode. That means we won't be able to see or hear anything at your end. Unfortunately, because of the sheer volume of people attending today, we won't be taking any questions live. However, we do encourage you to join in on the chat function. We're all there and we're really looking forward to hearing from you. So let us know who you are and where you're from and what you think of the discussion so far. We did get a lot of interesting questions sent to us on social in advance of today's webinar. So John will be attempting to get through as many of those questions as he can during the course of the discussion. So I really hope you enjoy today's event. Before I hand you over to John, here's a short video clip introducing the topic, and I hope you enjoy the webinar. Thanks. Good day to you, and welcome to this hotly anticipated showdown between the two heavyweights of the aviation world.
In the red corner, weighing in with 4 decades of dominance and the undisputed champion of the world's biggest airlines, it's the lean, mean moving machine known as Hub and Spoke.
And in the blue corner, weighing in with an even longer legacy, and the defender of the low-cost sector, it's the fresh, nimble crowd pleaser that calls itself Point to Point.
Which will emerge as the winner of the post-COVID business model of choice? We're here to find out.
For decades, Point to Point was the only way to travel. Regulations forbid anything else. But as deregulation began to tear down the walls between nations, a new way to travel emerged.
Hub and Spoke quickly became the preferred business model for the world's biggest airlines, funneling passengers through sprawling airports using some of the biggest aircraft ever deployed. This business model gave strategically located airlines the upper hand, particularly those in the Middle East who could effectively connect the entire world from their home at the fulcrum of East and West.
But times were changing and competition increasingly fierce. Hub and Spoke moved the masses but left secondary markets woefully underserved. This opened the door for agile low costs and ambitious startups to move in and fill the gaps. Analysts predicted the death of Hub and Spoke, but is it really doomed to be relegated to the archives of aviation history?
Today, airlines are facing a new world order where highly efficient twin jets are opening new opportunities and changing the competitive landscape. But the impact of COVID-19 on the airline model of the future cannot be understated. Airlines are emerging from 2020 burdened with debt and eager for a more profitable future.
Will the economic efficiency of Hub and Spoke make this the post-COVID airline model of choice? Or will passengers demand point to point to avoid the perceived risks of transiting in a foreign country?
To debate these points and much more, we hand you over to our host John Grant, partner at Avia Dev Consult, for a candid conversation with Sir Tim Clark, President of Emirates.
As an airline, Emirates has epitomised everything that's great about Hub and Spoke. Will the events of 2020 cause Emirates to re-evaluate its model? Where is it heading with its fleet? And what does Sir Tim, one of the veterans of the industry, think about the future of aviation? Let's get some answers. John, it's over to you.
So Tim, good afternoon. Lovely to see you with the sun in your background. It's been an interesting year, hasn't it?
Well, that's got to be the understatement of the century, probably. Yes, I think it's an unprecedented, has been an unprecedented year, not just for the aviation industry, but for the global economy. And so I guess in the end, we're kind of looking forward to an exit from all of this in the next 6 to 9 months, but time will tell.
It will. Allow us to sort of reminisce a bit and go back to the start of your career. So Wikipedia tells me an economics background. And then some time spent at a railway station in Sussex that had an airport attached to it. And then you ended up in the Middle East. Tell us about how you did that, because that would be a long journey from what is now the South Terminal at Gatwick to the Middle East.
Yes, interesting. I didn't think this was going to be about me, but anyway, in a nutshell, I left British Caledonia in the spring of '75 as a 25-year-old young planner. By that time, I was in the corporate planning section of BCal. I was offered a job overseas. I'd spent my childhood overseas anyway. So it wasn't a big step for me to leave the UK, even though I was that age. And at the time, I had been working on a retrenchment program for British Caledonian. For those that were, some of us are still around. In 1974, we had to retrench the whole airline because it was running into difficulties. And of course, as a young planner, I was involved in the core group in working out what they knew the survival scenarios would be for the airline. And I realized that my name was at the top of the list in terms of the redundancy program. So that
done alphabetically.
Well, actually, I was just one of the youngest. And they seemed to think that, youth was expendable in those days. Anyway, it was a bit of a wake-up call for me. So I said to myself, well, I love this industry so much. I really don't want to be thrown out after a few years of this. So I opted to move to Gulf Air in Bahrain, which was a growing carrier, needed a lot of help. I was able to contribute a lot quicker and more meaningfully than I had been, for instance, as a small cog in the BCal planning machine. And we built an airline. Again, it was built on the sort of factory expertise over the next 10 years, which became world class. And from there, I moved when I was asked by the people in Dubai to come across to work on a new carrier here, which nobody had disclosed at that stage, but I did join them to be head of airline planning for the airline in the summer of '85. And we started flying in October of that year. So Emirates was born then. And I've been with it ever since. So
wow. I recall standing in Caledonian House when the first Emirates A310 landed at Gatwick, and the then BCal managing director David Coltman was standing behind us, and he just went, "Poof, they'll never last." And history says very much otherwise. So you clearly loved the industry. Was that love affair before you had actually joined BCal and you wanted to get into aviation, or it slowly developed as you went through that corporate planning?
I say to a lot of people, it was my passion. It became my hobby. Fortunately, I've been paid for it. It remains that way. And of course, as a young child, when I was going backwards and forwards on super constellations and latterly Boeing 707s and VC-10s to the Far East, my love of the business and love of flying and being in airplanes was instilled in me. And I never really wanted to do anything else. One of my brothers joined BOAC through the Hamburg Flying School and retired as a 747-400 captain. So we were all minded, not all of us, there were four brothers. But for me, it was the only way I wanted to go. When I was doing my degree, I tried to get onto the BOAC graduate training scheme, got accepted to that. And then, of course, they had another cull. As usual, the airline industry is always the same, hasn't changed in 50 years. And ended up determined to get in at any level. So when BCal offered me a job as a check-in agent, I grabbed it because I saw this as the beginning. And actually, it was probably the best time of my career, working and plodding the ramp at Gatwick, checking in passengers. I got to know how the granular, the nature of our business at the customer fronting level worked, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then, of course, moved into planning.
Sure. And I guess your thumbs occasionally got a little bit of that horrible red ink on the back of them from all the tickets you were pulling and putting in the boarding cards and the wallets.
Yeah. That, and we didn't have automated systems then, so it was all paper driven.
Yeah, I remember behind there used to be the seat map, and you used to pull out there's your seat. Yeah,
that's it. I actually redesigned that. sat down one day and thought, this is not keep doing this. And I produced a scheme, which I've still got in one of my cupboards here, which then, but they told me that they were about to automate check-in. Automate. What is that? And we have computer systems coming in to do check-in. I thought, wow, what's all that about? And yes, of course, again, the rest is history. But at that stage, we were in what we call the IPARS res system. So reservations was already automated.
Yeah.
And I was working on the res desk quite a lot in those days. So I understood the way the systems work for distribution.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So someone sold you a dream to go and work for an airline that had no name in a place at that time that was a bit of a, small location, a bit of a creek, and there was some trade activity, but not very much. Has that dream must have turned out to be so much bigger than you ever expected?
Well, there's no question of that. I came across, I guess my tenure in Gulf Air was coming to a close anyway. They were seeking to nationalize most of the jobs. Because I was the youngest, I was probably one of the last to go, but then this came up.
It's a common theme in your career.
It's to be, yes. So I was approached by the group that had been set up under Maurice Flanagan, the late Maurice Flanagan.
Yes, good old Sir Maurice. Yeah.
And there were 10 of us who were brought in to do this. And I liked it was a clean sheet of paper. Mm-hmm. Nobody really knew what they wanted, where they wanted to go at that stage. They just knew they wanted an airline. I won't go into the political reasons for that, but they wanted an airline. And so it was a clean sheet of paper. When I came along, they said, look, you've got to understand a few things. And I said, what's that? They said, well, there's no money. I said, well, what do you mean there's no money? They said, well, there is, the ruler, who is now the ruler, gave us $10 million in cash. And so on that basis, you have to build the airline, map it out, assemble a group of people who are experts in all their fields. And with that, we set to. And we learned, very quickly what we could and couldn't do. And of course, we were under a lot of pressure not to expand. The David Coltman expression, they'll never last, was a common view, which of course just added a little bit more impetus to get the job done.
Yes.
And so we started with the 727s and all the other bits and pieces. But as a planner, because we were restricted on access into the regional markets for political reasons, I thought to myself, well, frankly, we'll have to go international. We'll have to move quickly. And I believe we could do it because the competition at that stage was pretty minimal. And I was a great believer in globalism, even in the mid-80s, what could be coming. And so we started, and we bought those 310s that David scoffed at, and again, moved very quickly into the international markets based on a product. I've still got the original business model written on paper in my lower drawer just here.
Wow.
10 points, which we haven't deviated from. We've absolutely stuck to that. It's just a question of scale. The more we did, the more we scaled, I'm not going to say the easier it became, but it became more obvious that this business model was going to work on the back of the globalization that kicked in the late 80s, mid 90s. And
of course, you've got to pivot and have balance of capacity either side of that hub, haven't you? Which we'll, probably touch upon. It's not replicable now, is it? What's happened in Dubai? There's no opportunity for that to happen again. I don't think anywhere around.
I would never say never. If anybody had said to me that in 1975, when I first came to Dubai, and then latterly when I joined the company in 85, and not a lot had changed in that time, that this city would become the global metropolis that it is today, with all the bells and whistles that it has, I would have probably been consigned to the loony bin. The fact of the matter is that has happened. Now, is that to say that history tells us that when Singapore emerged from the 50s and 60s under Lee Kuan Yew, and became what it is today, you've got Hong Kong was another example of that, up to 1997, and so forth. So is it possible it can happen elsewhere? Yeah, I think so. I would never say never. It just needs drive right from the top. You need people with vision, the champions of all of this. It'll work.
Yeah, Yeah, and you know, it's been a huge success, no doubt about that. Um, but then, of course, you've been there for a very long time, and you know, it's on record that you were perhaps thinking of doing something different, and leaving, and COVID came around. How You can't prepare for an event like that, can you? Whatever sort of scenario planning you have done as an airline, and all of those sort of things, there is no way that you could have thought about this event and how it would all shape out.
No, we fortunately, having been in this part of the world for best part of 45, 46 years now, I was kind of used to traumas, whether it be regional traumas, global traumas, and you can run all those off, whether it be 9/11, whether it be the meltdowns, etc., plus the regional wars in this part of the world. So we were pretty hardened to dealing with crises of various levels. So this one, of course, was far worse. But in terms of the psyche of the business and the people running it, getting used to traumas, it didn't necessarily faze us. It was just the longevity of it, which of course we're all facing, the magnitude of it, and then we had to shut the airline down for 2.5 months last year. That's anathema to our thinking. And then eventually, during the course of the summer of last year, we had to start contracting the workforce, which we've never done before. We've always been expansionist. The notion that we would lay off 20% of our staff was kind of a difficult one for people like me, because I'd never had to do it before. But never mind, we got on with it. We did all that. But you know, it's the airline, typical Emirates. We got going within the middle of March. We started converting our passenger aircraft into freighters. Got the freighter fleet active. We knew that with the diminished belly hold capacity, simply because the long haul capacity had been grounded, that there would be an opportunity. And of course, that turned out to be a good call. So we now have all our 777s, 151 of them, flying, either with passenger operations, passenger cargo, all cargo, and the 777 freighters. So we've actually managed to get about 30% of the income that we would have got under any normal year, which frankly, under the circumstances, was amazing.
Yeah.
And mainly that has been cargo. So the team's really got to it. You know, we've got a great can-do, will-do attitude in the business. And people sitting around doing nothing is anathema to all of us.
Yeah.
So everybody got on with the job. And so, you know, we've kept our head above water.
And of course, we're all hoping that vaccinations and vaccination passports are going to be the solution to the problem. You've been one of the leading carriers in trials and things. How's that going? And is it the way out of this?
Well, you know, I think I'm on record sometime in the summer of last year saying the only way out of this is the vaccine. You know, we can advance our test, track and trace, our testing regimes, etc. And there have been, you know, major advances in that. But in the end, the notion that the global population has to be vaccinated, 13 billion vaccines have got to be administered as quickly as possible, for me was the only way to unlock. And I thought that at the time. I haven't changed that view. And as you know, we've experienced difficulties. Yes. I could see that there would be vaccine distribution problems, there will be scalability of production problems, and I could see it being politicized. Much of that has happened. But in the end, these vaccines will come out at pace and at scale. And I think by the end of this year, we will have cracked the nut. So it's a question of countries opening borders, reducing the conditionality of entry, and giving the airlines a chance to go back. That can only happen if you had a double vaccine and perhaps a PCR negative before you travel. All that can be.
It strikes me it's going back to yellow fever jab days, isn't it? And carrying something a bit more sophisticated than a piece of paper with you. But you were, I mean, as an airline, well, the airport was doing some trials in the summer, wasn't it? Where it was talking about 10-minute testing and all of these sort of things. If there is any sort of requirement for testing on airports, presumably that will have an impact on the airline's operations in terms of slowing down passenger processes and immigration, etc., or do you think airports are going to gear themselves up for these things?
Well, it's a very good question. The airline world, airport world at the moment, certainly before the pandemic, was hugely compressed. As you know, there was very little infrastructure development, very few new airports being built. Take a look at the US. So the airports in their banks, in their peaks, were absolutely running at 100%. The notion that you would interdict another step in the process of passenger processing in those passenger processor buildings would be very difficult to administer. The trick is, I hope, is that the vaccines will be sufficiently efficacious and proven so, and have a degree of longevity supported maybe by boosters, that even those quick tests will be not required. If you have to do that, given the situation that we face here, that we're taking people from one hemisphere to the other, not on a non-stop basis, these quick tests would be difficult to administer. Not impossible, but it would slow the process down when the passenger processor is already under a high degree of stress. So ideally, that wouldn't be the way, but I can see in the short term that we may have to adapt to that.
All right. You touched on it very briefly. You sort of skirted around it. The frustration of governments around the world in their handling of this. What you can do, what you can't do. Do you need a Mensa test before you qualify for a vaccine? All of these sort of things. So frustrating for you logistically, I imagine.
It's been a real challenge. To give you an example, today, France requires the number of countries that we serve. There are 70 different sets of requirements determined by which country you come from. So check-in agents, distribution has got to take, has got to recognize what they may be. I think that taken together, it has become so chronic that the demand for travel has virtually collapsed. See airports in Europe reporting in February of last year 95% down on the number of people. Simply, it's becoming too difficult to operate under those conditions. You may leave and then the conditions change for when you return, then you find yourself stuck somewhere. So we have to get rid of all of that. That has to end. And I can see that, gradually there will be a recognition during the course of the remains of 21 where this is no way to continue. We've got to get these vaccines out. We've got to trust them to do their job and deal with the risks that come with that, but they're not nearly as large as they were in 2020. And get things going.
It's interesting because, I grieve for the airline industry because whenever there is an administrative cost or there is a need to raise a tax within a government, the first place they seem to look at is the aviation industry, be it departure taxes, be it various levies that they apply to travel. Is there a risk that if there is a global travel passport type system that the cost of this is going to be passed through to the airlines, do you think?
I think if we get some sense in the global travel certification processing, which it'll be incumbent upon the individual to travel, and they will have to, when they travel, to have the documentation in some form. If it is digitized, and the veracity of the data going up into the digital application is okay with everybody. This is the problem. It's not about the digital pass. It's about whether the upload and the quality of the upload is going to be acceptable to foreign countries, to various countries. Let's assume that all works. Then I believe it can be seen, as you mentioned, the yellow fever passport document rather. I can see those being everything being automated. So when you get your vaccination done, there will be and it is digitized. It'll be switched straight into the reservation systems and through that into the DCA departure control systems, and all that will mean that there will be very little cost to the airline industry. So I don't really see this as an impediment to travel. The demand is sufficiently strong to overcome that.
Right. It's been fascinating watching how few airlines have collapsed in the last 15 months. And as someone has said to me, well, there's nowhere else to put the aircraft. You might as well leave them with the airlines at the moment. But do you think we will enter a period of some degree of consolidation or failure around the world of some of those small carriers? You know, that mid-market type airline that is neither niche or is a hub global player, they must be in a really vulnerable position, I think.
Well, of course, but what you have seen, despite all the baloney over the last few years about subsidies and everybody accusing each other of not playing the game, virtually every airline on the planet now has been subsidized in some shape or form. And clearly then there's a recognition by the countries in which these airlines are domiciled that they cannot leave it as it was. And if they don't support the airlines financially, there will be no airlines and there will be no aerospace industry, and the multiplier effect that has on their economies and the global economy. So fortunately, there has been a recognition of that. What has that done? That has kept some airlines that are technically bankrupt today going in the interest and the state intervention, whether that comes under equity injection, loans, warrants, whatever it may be. But the fact of the matter is the industry is being kept intact. Let's assume that going forward that remains the case. It's not in the interest of countries to lose their aviation lift entities because it's so important to what they do and what the global economy is about. So my own view is that will there be consolidation? That depends on how much the states are prepared to continue funding them until such time as they are cash positive and able to deal with it themselves. There was always a case for more consolidation in some of the older legacy carriers, but at the same time we've seen a growth of the low-cost budget carriers. Yes. So I see a lot coming now. They're seeing that as an opportunity to fill some of the holes which they think are going to be there permanently. I'm not sure they will be. So there will be a rationalization, but it may go off in a direction that you may surprise you.
Yeah, that will be interesting. And of course, you've got Fly Dubai, who are a very close partner of yours, and we've now got Wizz Air in Abu Dhabi. So it's almost like that seepage from southeastern Europe into the Middle East and trying to get into the Indian subcontinent. It's fascinating. We saw it in the US as well when they seeped into the Caribbean. All of this, though, COVID-19, someone described it as a great social experiment that you would like to do, but you never could, people being trapped in houses, lockdown and all of those sort of things. Has it changed the strategy of Emirates, or has it just reaffirmed that everything you do is absolutely right and you're on track?
I see no reason to adjust our business model whatsoever. Frankly, we established ourselves as a medium long haul international carrier, got to the scale and size that we did. It was unique in its scale at the time, and I really don't believe that prior to the pandemic, we had 4.5 billion passenger movements a year. We probably shrunk to about 500 million, a billion. People will say we'll never get back to that. I don't believe that. I never have done. I think we will recapture that curve during the course of 2022, and that people's desire to travel, irrespective of COVID, hasn't changed. What we have to do is ensure that it's safe in terms of health, that there aren't degrees of conditionality along the lines that I mentioned, i.e. you can go out and then find you can't go back.
Yes.
All that has to go. But if we remove all that and take ourselves back to the autumn of 2019, then I see things picking up again. And in the shorter term, a bow wave of demand, which will have to be accommodated by a diminished airline community in terms of capacity offered. So I'm very optimistic about what is likely to happen during the course of the back 3 calendar months of this year.
Yeah, I've coined the phrase Mexican wave of demand because I just felt tsunami probably wasn't appropriate for the wave that we might see in the next few months. Let's hope that wave does occur. You haven't changed your strategy, and part of that was premium economy, which is, I've seen some pictures of it on the 380 and it looks great. Strikes me that, whether it's fortuitous or not, that is going to be a really sweet spot in terms of demand through the recovery and beyond. I mean, you're well placed, or you will be well placed in that space as well.
Yes, that's a view, obviously, that we share. It was important that we produced a world-class premium economy, of course, so that it caught the eye as it did of the media and a lot of the travelling public who we introduced it to without charging for it, because we haven't got enough. But if the pundits are correct about the diminished corporate segments over there, I don't share that view, by the way, but if they are right, then there will be a lot of people traveling today who couldn't necessarily afford the business class cabins.
Yeah.
Well, talk about the baby boomers in Europe. We're very happy to sit in our premium economy cabins on 380s. After all, when you look at it, the 380 premium economy cabin is absolutely beautiful. I say it myself, having basically designed it, but the height of the cabin, the width of the cabin, the 8 breadth seating, the 38-inch pitch, and all the other bits and pieces we've thrown at it with the beautiful wood veneers on the window lines and everything else has changed. It's really a class product. So I think these people will be quite happy to travel on that and pay the premium above the higher economy fare brackets to do it. So yes, we will roll out at pace. We've got to convert a lot of the aeroplanes in the process of getting premium economy to market. So that's high priority for us.
I think it's just fascinating, isn't it? I mean, we're both sadly old enough to remember when business class was first introduced, and Emirates, I know on your A310s, had that three abreast business class, which BCAL had as well. And that was like, wow, this is fantastic. And now that's not even premium economy. I mean, premium economy is a superior product to what we termed business class. It's absolutely fascinating. Relatively close to you, of course, is Dubai World Central, DWC, which was and is this great visionary. It's an estate. It's not just an airport, is it? It's a metropolis, and it's got lots of other things attached to it. You don't particularly want to go there, from what I understand, and there's no need to go there at the moment, is there? Is it ultimately you will move to DWC, do you think, or will it turn into some other type of airport?
Oh no, I think the government here is minded to build this according to the master plan that they laid out some time ago. The question is when. Obviously, COVID and everything else has slowed things down, and eventually Emirates will move down there. That's what the thing was being designed for, essentially. Of course, the 380s were part of that, but they don't figure so strongly. But yes, I think the government eventually, now whether it'll be at the end of this decade or the beginning of the next is anybody's guess, but I think they'll get there eventually.
And it will be, I mean, I did some work on it. It's a fascinating project, and it's the humanitarian parts of it, because there's refugee centres and hospitals and all sorts of things there. It's an incredible ambition they have. I'm privileged to go to the top of the control tower and see nothing when I went. So you know, there's a lot of work to be done still. You're talking of records. You're also on record recently in the context of Boeing and about their customer support. I'm intrigued. After that sort of story, did anyone from Boeing pick up the phone and say, "Sir Tim, you know, sorry, do we, you know, what can we do?"
I did have an engagement a couple of weeks ago with the head of Boeing Civil, Stan Deal, and we were discussing mainly things around the 777 program, which is in a state of disarray at the moment. So we needed to get some clarity on that. As regards my comments about the general state of the company, we didn't actually touch on that, as you can imagine. But the main concern of ours, of course, is where are we on the 777 program? Because we should have had the first one in June of last year, and so far we don't have any visibility as to when the first one will arrive. It's either back end of 23, 24, possibly even 25. Wow. So this of course is affecting all our plans. Notwithstanding the COVID situation, we're well beyond that. We're thinking now back end of this year through to the end of the decade, and where our network is going to be, what our fleet is going to look like, what type of aircraft, how many, etc. Now, not being able to factor in the 777-9 or 8 at this stage is a little bit of a problem for us. So we had to have that conversation with them. But that's
so yeah. So does that mean an extended stay for the 380? And it's, you know, I mean, it's a linchpin of your fleet and will be for some time.
Yeah,
but does it have any implications there?
Well, of course it does. But let me be quite clear. I'm a huge fan of the 380. I always have done. I got very much involved in its design, etc. But it will figure in the Emirates fleet for the next 15 years. Let's be quite clear about that. It's hugely popular.
Yeah,
85% of our profits prior to COVID came from the 380. It was always full, and the more we did, the more innovative we became, the more refreshed we did with our product. But it popular in all classes. So we see that continuing. Fuel at the moment is priced at a level that makes it even more viable, more profitable for us, and so that's gonna figure. But of course, when the 777-9 came along, we were able to start growing the capacity and growing the network, as well as taking some of the older 380s out because they were obviously coming up to the retirement age.
Mm-hmm.
All that has been shifted to the right, but we actually don't know by how much at this stage, and which is vexing us a little bit in terms of cash management, etc.
It must be extremely frustrating with the 777X, whatever variant. I mean, are you going to ultimately just be ordering Boeings, or do you think you'll be ordering some various Airbus type equipment as well?
We already have an order for 350s.
Yeah.
50, or I forget now what it is now. Look, the twins, wide-body twins, figure very much in our plans. Not so much for replacement. Unfortunately, the 380 will eventually have to be replaced, but for our ability to increase frequency of already profitable city pairs and introduce new routes which would be too big for a 777-300ER or even a 380. That allows us to open a lot more areas, countries or cities within those countries alongside Fly Dubai. So we would manage the capacity relationship between the two carriers into countries that we see real opportunity: Africa, South America, Asia, and believe it or not, Europe, which with the combination of all these aeroplanes gives us an enormous potential. That's where we're looking at it.
So there are, from what you're saying, there are clearly more and more destinations to be added to the network. From a network planner's perspective, there's always been that trade-off between capacity and frequency, isn't there? Do you use a large aircraft or you go for frequency? I guess the Emirates model has been based as much as possible around frequency. When you look at markets, major markets in Europe, you're probably 3 times daily, if not more. And that feeds the hub. So has it always been about that frequency and build frequency?
Well, it's a combination of both, because as you know, we don't have any single aisle aircraft.
No.
And we've been busy applying, the more we have, to my point I made earlier about the scaling of the operation, the notion that we would have 6 380s a day into Heathrow and 3 into Gatwick, 2 into Birmingham, 2 into Manchester, 1 into Glasgow a day,
and
plus all the other.
Don't forget Stansted.
And Stansted, but that was a 777.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the 380 operation, to the point I was making about, is it a combination? Is it one or the other? No, it isn't. It's a combination of the two. And that is, it stands testament to the quality of the 380, because as you know, Heathrow slots are restricted. Hong Kong slots are restricted. Every single airport in the world, major hub, is restricted on slots. So if you want to put a 787 in there to a Heathrow slot where you could put a 517-seater 380, it doesn't take long to get to the maths on that. No. See what it does. If you can put 6 in there a day, again, it just tells you what the power of that aeroplane is. So the question is, yes, we do follow the frequency argument, but with large aeroplanes, which is why people have felt fairly challenged by what we would do. having sort of two 380s into, for instance, somewhere like Dusseldorf a day prior to all this happening, 3 into Munich. These are things, and of course the Hamburg airport had to be adapted to take the 380, which they willingly did. As soon as they finished it, we put the 380 in there. So, and we still have 2 Hamburgs a day, one of which is the 380. So it's a combination of the two. The power of the hub allows us to take these large volumes and feed. One flight will feed 80 destinations within 2 hours of arriving. So you can imagine the incremental revenue that we gain at incremental cost. So as the hub gets larger, its unit costs fall, and its income generation rises exponentially.
It's fascinating. What do you, and to that point about the hub, you know, throughout all of COVID, there's been lots of discussions. Are hubs going to come back? Are we going to see long haul bypass routes, you know, on the thin sectors? And in the US at the moment, we've seen United and American flying, well, every piece of metal they can to Florida from every secondary city on a hub bypass. But ultimately, the hub will return, won't it? I mean, the power is the hub, the network is the hub, and that's where it's all going to come back to, isn't it?
I would say most definitely. I don't share the view that the hub and spoke model is over. I think the medium long haul hub that we have here is definitely one that will retain and grow over time. The notion that you would have twins flying, for instance, from Washington to Dar es Salaam, say in Tanzania, and carrying sufficient passengers on that flight on a non-stop basis to make money is a challenge, I would say. It is far simpler to fly from Washington to Dubai on a 380 and within 2 hours get to Dar es Salaam, make the connection and be there. And that Dar es Salaam flight I would have fed from 30 or 40 other flights. So if I can get 10 people on each, you can see the maths. It doesn't work in certain areas, yes, it may be. And I think, you know, when you get into the 321 XLR, the 787 MAX, 8, 9s and 10s, once we're all through that, there will be a lot more of it. But does that mean that the hub is on the long haul, medium haul is over? No, I don't think so.
No. And of course, we're seeing Aer Lingus announcing they're going to use their they're already using their 321s transatlantic. And I think Continental tried many years ago, didn't they, with a 757, which seemed to have problems from Europe in the winter when the wind was anything like about 20 knots. So it makes it very difficult. You're very generous with your time. You've had a really stunning career. You know, you've been at the forefront of the industry. What is the one thing that you think the industry slipped or missed during COVID, from your perspective? Was it a unified IATA voice quick enough? Was it getting governments to understand what they needed to do? What did the industry, from your perspective, miss?
Actually, the industry and the bodies within the industry, IATA, ARCO, etc., were very vocal from a very early stage. They understood because the constituents of those bodies are essentially airline heads. They knew what was coming and knew what it was. So I think the noise that was made at governmental level in the commercial world was very strong in the airline industry. So I don't want to be too disingenuous to what they did or didn't do. For any CEO to be faced with the collapse of demand to the level it was going to be a challenge. It is amazing that some people retained their sanity, frankly, and managed to stay the pace. And that sort of huge competitive force within the industry, if anything, it coagulated and created a kind of esprit de corps within the industry. We may be all competitors. We need to survive. This is a question of our very survival. It's not a question about able to outsmart the other. So I'm not really sure that could we have done things any better? Not really. The high degrees of conditionality outside our control determined what we could do, when and where, and that remains the case today. So the guys in the business are trying their very best to persuade governments to embrace vaccine passports, digital passes, all the other bits and pieces collectively. There is no there is no dissent in all of that. So fortunately, we are as one. And eventually persuade everybody that this business is vital to the global economy. I'm not going to talk any more about that, otherwise I'll be accused of motherhood platitudes. But the fact of the matter is, it is true. And I've seen in all areas of the world, airlines that have gone out of business, and that is an indictment not only to, what can I say? Some of these airlines would have gone out of business anyway. And we know what they are, but nevertheless, it brought focus to the states that they were domiciled, and also to the broader community, that the airline industry was in peril. And that, to my point earlier about the way they stepped up and got the money into the business to keep it ticking over, and that's still going on. What I hope, and although I'm faced with multiple competitors all around me, that the industry restores itself to its former glory, perhaps a bit smarter about the way it goes about it, and that the competitive forces that drove so many of the decisions that we took are reinstated. So we would be a better industry, hugely competitive. It gives the consumers what they need in terms of price points, products, etc., etc. If we went into a situation where there was a shrinkage of the business, and we returned to the 90s vintage of legacy think, then
regulated airfares, regulated meals.
Yeah, you saw that all being freed off. It was vital that, and era politics changed. So what I don't want to see is era political thinking reverting to predeterminist thinking that we were faced with in the 80s and 90s, driven by post-war thinking. So it's vital that we restore ourselves to the way we were operating in a hugely competitive environment. Unfortunately, successfully so, that states saw the low-hanging fruit with regard to taxation, which is a big shame because we are very marginal in the business. But to the point, to your question about could we have done things much better? Not really. I don't think anybody's faced anything like this. 90 passenger demand.
In 5 years' time, hopefully for your ambitions, someone else is sitting there. But what do you think the big change will have been in 5 years' time in the industry? Will sustainability, the environmental pressures, will all of those be coming through, and we'll be making the changes that we started on that journey? Is it going to be new technology, biometrics? What do you think the big game changer will be?
Well, these things are going on as we speak. You talk about biometrics. The airline industry has been at the forefront of information technology since the 60s.
Yeah.
It is embraced, developed, etc. And a lot of the innovation you see today in information technology systems has its birth in what the airlines used to do back in the 70s and 80s. Of course, as computing technology advances at the pace it is, we will be embracing all of that. But so will all the other transport modes on the planet today, whether it be road, rail, shipping, etc. And so I can see technology being at the airlines being at the cutting edge of the application of technology. You've seen that recently with something we did with all the work we did with the COVID test and trace testing systems that we had at airports. The environmental imperative will continue to be to the fore, and that'll drive not just what's going on in the airline industry, but if you look at automotive, power and utilities, domestic power, and all the other bits and pieces. In the next 5 years, that would accelerate. If anything COVID has done, it's got people to think about what they're going to be, how they're going to be living, how their business is going to run, how those modes are going to be powered. So I can see that happening. I can see airports being all electric, for instance, on the ramp, all the GSE vehicles being electric. I can't see electric airplanes at the moment because that's very hard. But surrounding us in every way that the airline industry can embrace the environmental requirement to change out fossil fuel usage, it will do it at a macro and a micro level. And that's been very much to the fore in the IATA doctrines going back 10 or 15 years now. So, yeah, I think we'll see a cleaner, more efficient industry, far more environmentally friendly.
Mhm.
What I won't say is that in 5 years' time we'll have electric-powered aircraft
No,
flying.
I understand the batteries are far too heavy for that.
600-ton aircraft over
Exactly,
7,000
yeah.
nautical mile
And
miles.
airports will charge you a fortune based on landing fees if it's on a per tonnage basis. The Duke, apparently, the Duke of Edinburgh, because I wasn't there, told Prince Harry, "Don't screw it up, son." And he may well have done, who knows. And one Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK left a note to his successor in his desk saying he'd spent all the cash. When that moment arrives for you, what is, and you take out that first Emirates master plan you had, which is in your bottom right hand drawer, what is the note you're going to leave for your successor?
Well, I would say the ethos of what we do in Emirates is about being brave and bold and innovative and being extremely focused in whatever you choose to do. And that last phrase is very important. If you choose to change course for whatever reason, you must be absolutely sure that you deliver it to the business model that you design. It can't be a hybrid. You can't be half pregnant and then all this. You've got to make sure that whatever you choose to do. Now, the way we did it, I believe to be the future. I really believe that to be the case. I would say to them, don't change this. Adapt it if necessary to do all the things I've talked about with regard to additional market size of network, etc. But don't necessarily change what we have been so successful in doing. But whatever you do, never ever lose focus. Do not allow yourself to be sidetracked from what I call the main squeeze. Mm-hmm. Just get on with that. Others have decided they might start producing milk powder or go into some conglomerate or decide that they are so good at what they do, they can turn their hands to others. That is destined to fail and has failed multiple times.
Yes.
Emirates has always been focused on that original business model, delivering to it. And I would say, do that. And if you are going to change, for whatever reason, be sure that that change is going to bring the value to the shareholder, and the business along the new lines, if that's what you want to do, will have the same kind of drive and focus that we had in the early days on this one. Then it should work.
Amazing. Finally, airline CEOs never retire. You've been injected not just with the vaccine, but with kerosene, and it's there. What would you like to do next, and why? Obviously, you can't head up IATA at the moment because some Irishman's going to have a go at that for a few years, and that will be really fascinating to see what happens there. But what do you want to not tinker, but what would you enjoy doing for the next couple?
Well, I've got a couple of things. I should probably stay on advising the government of Dubai on aviation matters. Going forward, so I shall probably retain a presence here anyway. Yep. There are one or two other things. I've been involved with the Royal Foundation on the United for Wildlife exercise that has been going for quite a few years under Prince William. Mm-hmm. I think I'd probably like to get more involved in that, just to deal with the issues that are clear and present in what's going on in the extinction threat of so many of our animals on the planet. Things like that. I know I've already had offers of positions at board level, which I'm kind of a little bit reluctant to do, given that they do require a commitment, both fiduciary and others. And that doesn't give me the time I'd like to spend in areas that, such as the ones I just mentioned. So I'm trying to get a balance right, as well as but at 71, I ain't got that much time left to do that much.
No, absolutely not. And you've given so much to the aviation industry, and I know you've enjoyed it and you speak passionately about it. But there does come a time when everyone deserves a rest. And so, Tim, firstly, thank you very much for your time. And I think success in whatever you do, I'm sure, is a given. You've probably got a cup of coffee that's gone a little bit cold there now, but thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
You're welcome, John. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joe, back to you.
Thanks, John. And wow, that was a great discussion. I really enjoyed hearing from Sir Tim. I think he's given us plenty of food for thought, not just about the hub and spoke model, but also about the future of Emirates. And actually, it was so great to hear so much about him as a person as well. I think I speak for all of us when I say I really hope he stays within the industry when he does take his eventual retirement. So thank you, John, so much for such a stimulating discussion today. And thanks to Sir Tim for being so generous with his time. And most of all, thanks to you guys for coming along and enjoying this event. And particularly those who were joining in with the chat. It's been a very lively discussion and lots of fun. So I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. We'd appreciate your feedback on today's event. So please do contact me directly at joanna@simpleflying.com. You can also reach out to us on social media. Just search for Simple Flying on your favorite social channel. And thanks again for coming, and have a really good rest of the day.